Hello there, this is David from David Books and Comics, and today I'm going to look through again the Avon digest-sized paperbacks that I have. And this is Abraham Merritt's The Ship of Ishtar. You saw this on a previous episode, but I missed one of them, so I'm going to show you the entire digest-sized Avons that I have. All right, so we'll go through them, and for some of them, because they're anthology books, we're going to have to look inside and see. So there's the Ship of Ishtar, and then we have the Moon Pool, then 7 Footprints to Satan, and of course the Metal Monster. So first on the list is this one. This is Somerset Maugham's Great Stories of Love and Intrigue. And you know that he's the author of The Razor's Edge. And that was made into a film twice, I believe. One in the 1940s and a more recent one, I think in the 1980s or 90s. I don't remember. Anyway, so that's Somerset Maugham. I think he also wrote, he's most famous for writing a book called Of Human Bondage. All right, so let's go to the next book. And it's this one. This is 5 Sinister Characters. This is an anthology book by Raymond Chandler, and it features short stories. And they're all Philip Marlowe stories. So if you look, Trouble is My Business, Pearls Are a Nuisance, I'll Be Waiting, The King in Yellow, and Red Wind. So that's that one. So that's 5 Sinister Characters featuring short stories featuring the detective Philip Marlowe. And this guy I know very little about. This is Dwight V. Babcock, Homicide for Hannah. And we have a short story anthology of 7 stories by Sinclair Lewis. 7 selected short stories. And I'm just going to put this aside and show you this. This is the Avon Fantasy Readers with stories by Abraham Merritt, Catherine Lucille Moore, H.P. Lovecraft, and others. And so we look inside, and I think it's a Northwest Smith story that is the C.L. Moore story. And we have stories by Abraham Merritt, Frank Owen, H.G. Wells, H.P. Lovecraft, C.L. Moore, Donald A. Wollheim, Stephen Grendon, John Collier, and Homecoming by Ray Bradbury. So this is the Avon Fantasy Reader number 3. Publication date is 1940s, I believe. Gives me the publication date. It does not. 1947. There it is at the bottom. Okay. So that's that one. Then we have another Avon Fantasy Reader. And this is the Blonde Goddess of Belsagoth, or Belsagoth, by Robert E. Howard. And stories by Sax Rohmer, Miles J. Brewer, Clark Ashton Smith. And the Robert E. Howard story is the first one. And it's a Turlog O'Brien short story. So you have Robert E. Howard, Clark Ashton Smith, Sax Rohmer, Manly Wade Wellman, Miles J. Brewer, Lord Dunsany, Bassett Morgan, M.R. James, and Walter Kubilius. So that's that one. Beautiful cover. The Blonde Goddess of Belsagoth. And there's William Irish, the notorious William Irish, writer of great mystery stories. This one is called If I Should Die Before I Wake. That's a prayer. And there's the Peter Cheney. I don't know if it's a Slim Callahan novel or not. So this is They Never Say When, an Avon book. Okay, this is from the Murder Mystery Monthly Reader. And then we have some more Avon fantasy reader. The Curse of 1,000 Kisses by Sax Rohmer. And you can look inside and see what there is. And we have Shambleau by C.L. Moore. The Curse of 1,000 Kisses by Sax Rohmer. The Dreams of Albert Moreland by Fritz Leiber. The Slugly Beast by Lord Dunsany. The Cairn of the Headland by Robert E. Howard. Aquila, Donald A. Wollheim. The Empire of the Necromancers, Clark Ashton Smith. When Old Gods Wake by Abraham Merritt. The Weir Snake by Frank Belknap Long, Jr., and The Gun by Frank Gruber. And this is from 1948. All right, so that's that one. And then we have this one. This is Dwellers in the Mirage by Abraham Merritt. That's the one I missed. And it looks like SF, science fiction. All right, so that's the Murder Mystery Monthly. So that's that. And last but not least, I want to showcase Hulbert Footner. And this is called Orchids to Murder. It features his detective, Amos Lee Mappin, who is one of his famous detective series characters. But his most famous series detective character is a woman named Madame Rosika Story. And I'll show you another Amos Lee Mappin it's a rare publication. It's a Collins novel. This is called The Folded Paper Mystery. And among the many characters in here is a guy named Christopher Morley, who himself is a writer. And he's showcased here in this novel. And both Hulbert Footner and Christopher Morley would be very close friends. So I do have Rosika Story Mysteries. Oh. So Hulbert Footner. There's another one. Self-Made Thief. And here's a Madame Rosika Story novel. And this is a facsimile dust jacket of another anthology book of short stories featuring Madame Rosika Story. Kind of a psychological detective. All right, so let me share a little bit about it. And I'm going to read from David Skeen Melvin's book, Crime in a Cold Climate, to give you some background on Hulbert Footner. And you'll see why it's Crime in a Cold Climate, because all of the stories were looking for the publication date here, if I can find it. This is a recent publication. Yeah, 1994. All right. So let me share to you a little bit about Hulbert Footner. So Footner was born, William Hulbert Footner, in 1879, 2nd of April, in Hamilton, Ontario. The son of Harold John Footner and Frances Christine Mills Footner. Hulbert Footner was educated at Evening High School, New York City. A journalist in New York City in 1905 and in Calgary, Alberta in 1906. He then became a full-time freelance writer. Footner lived for most of the latter part of his life in the state of Maryland. He was highly respected as a local historian of the Maryland Tidewater, which he wrote about in Maryland, Maine, and the Eastern Shore, and Rivers of the Eastern Shore, published as part of the Important Rivers of America series. His home was a 17th century mansion, which he lovingly restored. He wrote of its history and of the renovation in Charles' Gift, Salute to a Maryland House of 1650. The mansion was actually called Charles Gifts. He died in his beloved home on the 25th of November in 1944. And in the introduction to Orchids to Murder, you will find a loving homage by Christopher Morley in the introduction to the book, published or written in 1944. Footner made a minor contribution to the fiction of the Canadian Northwest, the setting for his first novel, Two on the Trail. His 1,200-mile trek through the region is also described in his book, New Rivers of the North, a yarn of two amateur explorers on the headwaters of the Fraser, Peace River, and the Hay River, Alexandra Falls. Despite this experience, Footner was one of the writers of Northerns, mocked by Arthur Stringer in The Man Who Could Not Sleep. Prolific is an apt descriptor for his output. In the late 1920s and early 1930s, he often produced 3 books a year. Most of his mystery stories are set in New York City, where he was part of the literati in the Roaring Twenties, hobnobbing with writers such as Christopher Morley. His best stories feature the intriguing Madame Rosica story. So this is, I believe, the first hardcover edition, published by a company called Doran, and it features stories that were originally published in Munsey's pulp magazines. So that's that one. This one is a lengthy novel featuring our protagonist, Madame Rosica story, Sleuth of the Underworld. All right, so I just wanted to share that, take the opportunity to talk about Hulbert Footner. I did read one of his books, or I should say a few of his books, and he is a very good writer. Surprisingly, editions of his book have not been republished. They're more like print on demand, I believe, type books. But anyway, one of the unheralded and sometimes forgotten writers, forgotten by the people who don't know, I guess. All right, thanks for watching, and remember, the comments are always appreciated. Okay, bye.